Hello and welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. This is a podcast to help you find peace with food and overcome disordered eating. And I'm Harriet Frew, aka the Eating Disorder Therapist. And I'm so excited to share with you all kinds of stories, tips, information and guest interviews to help you on your journey in finding peace with food. So thank you so much for listening today. Today I'm talking to Toni, the Binge Dietitian, a UK Registered Dietitian who is based in Peru and working with women all over the world who have binge eating behaviours. Previously, Toni worked within the UK National Health Service and has a range of experience with diabetes, weight management, learning disabilities and mental health. But she now works online and is a weight-inclusive and non-diet approach dietitian. Throughout her dietetic career, Toni has always been passionate in sharing her love for food and helping people to realise that even with chronic conditions like diabetes, there is no list of foods that they should or shouldn't be eating. She has always experienced there being so much confusion with food advice among her clients and consequently brings this passion to educating her clients and busting nutritional misinformation and fads. In the past, Toni wanted to be a dancer, and when she was 18, she attended a dance college to pursue this dream. Unfortunately, her experience was far from positive when Toni and her peers experienced teachers making unhelpful comments focusing on body image and appearance. In this environment, she also observed friends around her having a toxic relationship with food, and these experiences understandably had a negative impact on her own self-esteem and body image. At this point, she made the courageous decision to leave this path. Following this period, Toni's relationship with food and body image was a struggle. Even as training to be a dietitian, she was stuck in diet culture and body dissatisfaction, which had a detrimental impact on her well-being and self-esteem. Today, though, Toni has left all of this behind and is now working in the non-diet space, online and based in Peru, and she started this work earlier this year following this exciting move with her husband. So you can find Toni on Instagram as the.binge.dietitian, and she's offering a free 30-minute call which you can book through her Instagram bio, so do go and check that out. I'm really looking forward to talking to Toni today to hear more about her journey in healing her relationship with food, what helped and hindered and led her to the place she is in today. I'm also excited to hear about the work she is doing online from Peru and to delve into the tools and strategies she uses to support her clients in overcoming binge eating. Let's get to the conversation. This episode is brought to you by the National Centre for Eating Disorders, the NC-FED. Does eating rule your life? If you struggle with control of food, if you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, if you want to speak in confidence to someone who fully understands your relationship with food, contact Sam at the National Centre for Eating Disorders. You will find our details online or call 0845 838 2040. We know everything there is to know about eating distress, and all our practitioners are properly trained. The first simple step is to have a no obligation assessment where you can speak freely in confidence to someone who understands and who will be able to tell you what is keeping you stuck. You will not need to do anything else if you simply want to think about what we have to say. If eating rules your life, take that first brave step now and get in touch. 0845 838 2040 during the week, or look us up at www.eating-disorders.org.uk. Hi, Toni. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Harriet. I'm looking forward to being here.
So, Toni, please would you firstly introduce yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, so I'm Toni Rudd. I'm a UK Registered Dietitian and I work with women all over the world with binge eating as an online dietitian.
Okay. So Toni, you are based in Peru. So as we were talking before we went on, we know that in the UK at the moment, we're in the middle of a heat wave and it's like 40 degrees. But what's it like in Peru at the moment? What's the weather like?
It's actually hotter at home in the UK. Here in Peru, we're in winter. So it says it's about 18 degrees, but the humidity in Miraflores where I live it actually feels a lot colder than that. And a few weeks ago, me and my husband were laughing at the Peruvians in their big puffer jackets. Like, it's not like winter at home. It never rains here as well, so that's an absolute bonus for me.
Oh, I bet. And what temperatures does it get up to in the summer when when you have your lovely weather?
Yeah, so our summer will be in UK winter time, so it's generally in like the high 20s, early 30s.
Yeah, no, lovely.
Yeah.
And can I ask you, Toni, I know you've sort of fairly recently moved to Peru. So can you sort of tell us as well kind of what prompted that move? Because it sounds like quite brave and obviously like quite a big change, I would imagine.
Yeah, totally. So my husband actually got offered a job here. It's coming up to a year ago. I think after the last 2 years being stuck at home, me and my boyfriend at the time lived in a 1-bedroom flat. And we both had to work from home after the COVID pandemic, like most people. We felt like we just needed a big change. And my now husband started applying for jobs abroad, and Peru came up. We never thought South America, but these things happen, I suppose. And here I am. So I decided to quit my job, move with my husband, and kind of set up online private practice, really.
Sure. It sounds like lots of exciting changes for you.
Yeah, it's been a big culture shock, I think. Where we live is very normal, but other parts of Peru, it's such a diverse country. I live in Lima, which is the capital, and that's a desert. And then we've got mountains, we've got beaches, we've got cities, we've got everything here. So it's a very diverse place, and it makes weekends away a bit more exciting.
No, I'm sure. And I'm just curious, actually, just sort of thinking about sort of South America, Peru, what's it like in terms of body image, and how, is it very similar to the UK, or is it quite different in terms of like the ideal body or how people feel about their bodies? Have you seen is there a difference from, the UK?
I find it more relaxing here. I do think Peru is a bit behind time. Yeah, that's quite a difficult question. I think there is obviously people care about what they look like, but there's also an element of it doesn't really matter what you look like. I came here and I don't really wear makeup anymore. I haven't bought any new clothes. Whereas in the UK, every weekend it was needed a new outfit for this. I need to put makeup on to do this. And here it's kind of a lot more relaxed in that perspective from my own experience.
Sure, no, interesting.
Yeah.
So Toni, I know you've been on your own journey in sort of struggling with issues with food and body image. So would you sort of take us back and tell us a bit about that journey and sort of some of the things that happened?
Yeah, so as you said in my intro, I grew up as a dancer. And in the dancing world, reflecting back, I was all around disordered eating disorders. And I remember girls at my dance school would purge, eat, then purge. And it was kind of seen as normal. And I say normal in quotations. Yeah, it was. I never really had any kind of thoughts to do this. And I say thoughts. I just think when I was younger and in that dance world, it was just so normal to have that kind of thoughts and feelings around food. As a dancer, I was always aware of what foods give me better energy, I suppose, and what foods didn't. So I always had that early interest in food, which really kind of helped me become a dietitian, I think. But when I went to dance college when I was 18, I experienced teachers talking to myself and my friends saying things like, don't get your belly out unless you've got a six-pack. Or one of the things that really stuck in my head was don't get your corned beef legs out. If you Google, I'll let you Google corned beef legs, because it's not a very nice thing to say to anyone, no matter about a 16, 17, 18-year-old girl. Yeah, that was a really difficult part, I think. And another thing that impacted my struggles around food and body image was that we kind of the diet culture that we're brought up in. And I know it's something that's spoken a lot about, but I really think that I've been stuck in diet culture for the last 15 years. I actually grew up with my mum struggling with her own body image, and there was a point where she was a well-known slimming group coach. And I remember going to meetings to her for like every week for 2 to 3 times a week. So I basically got brought up with seeing women and men come to their community centres and get weighed every week. I think reflecting on my own life and my own thoughts and feelings around food and body image, I think they play a big role in what happened.
Yeah, so it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? I guess you had sort of 2 quite strong influences there, like as well as just having the general influence of being in our sort of diet culture world. Definitely, like with a mum as your kind of role model, being a kind of, slimming coach, whatever, and you going on to meetings, you're getting a very strong message there, aren't you, that dieting is just like a normal thing to do and what happens. Yeah. But then as well, being in the dance world, and it sounds like you're quite unfortunate to have really kind of unhelpful comments said out loud. And I think at that time, we're really vulnerable, aren't we? It's really hard, I think, not to be impacted by those kind of comments.
I watched friends around me kind of turn to food as a punishment and start obsessive behaviours. And I remember my dance school put one of my friends on a diet, and it was black coffee for breakfast, and for dinner it was a fruit salad, and she could only have four what were they, Brazil nuts. And I remember her saying to me, like, that's the amount of fat your body needs for a total day just in these 4 walnuts. So it was a very difficult time in my life, and I remember that I just had that kind of front to just say this isn't for me, and that's when I decided to kind of quit that part of my life and move on to something else.
So that was quite a courageous step for you, because I guess it would have been, probably quite easy in a way, although it was like quite a destructive and uncomfortable environment in many ways. If that had been your dream for a long time, what all your peers were doing, I can imagine that you may have felt a lot of pressure to just continue.
Yeah, and there was a part of me that thought, do I just carry on? But I remember thinking, like, they're trying to make me into something that I'm not, which, looking back now, that is quite a courageous thing. And I actually, after that, I went into just working at McDonald's. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I was 19. I never thought I would go to uni. But then my mum actually went to uni before me, and she brought home a load of leaflets, and one of them was dietetics. And I remember reading the kind of course structure and seeing like the eating disorders. And I remember being quite drawn to that, like, that is what I want to do. I didn't really know enough about disordered eating at that time, but I think, that's how I kind of fell into dietetics.
And was there much of a sort of gap between leaving dance and then going off to uni? Like, did you have a sort of bit of a breathing space in between?
I think it was about March time I left the dancing and my dance school. And then I think the September I went not to uni. I had to do like an access course to get into uni. So I did that first, and then the year after I went into uni and to become a dietitian.
Okay. And I understand you were still sort of struggling with your relationship with food. And I mean, I think quite understandably, having come from dance and the previous experiences, but as you went into dietetics, were you still sort of struggling with body image and food during that time?
Again, I think it's all to do with this kind of being stuck in diet culture. Understandably, after stopping dancing, I was still eating as I was, and my weight did go up. And to look at me, people probably wouldn't have said that I was too high of weight, but I knew at the time that I was, and I was probably in a lot of body dissatisfaction at that time. So I've tried all the diets. I've tried eating less than 1,200 calories. I've tried, eating grapefruit to burn fat. And this is when I was training to be a dietitian. And even as a dietitian in recent years, I would secretly eat in my car on the way home from work after a stressful day. That's because I probably wasn't eating enough in the day. And obviously with the stressful job, it all adds up, and that's how kind of your body reacts to it, I suppose.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think it's very hard to maintain sort of restriction, isn't it, over a sustained period. And I think you're not alone, Toni, that I think many people who struggle with issues with food go into dietetics, also eating disorders. I myself very much did that in the beginning. I was very much a wounded healer when I was training as a therapist. also go into sort of personal training, wanting to be kind of in those environments. So I think you're not alone there. I think it's almost perhaps a higher risk factor sometimes, actually, that people can be drawn to those professions.
No, I completely agree. And I think that was one of the things that came out of the Minnesota starvation experiment. Some of the men actually went into jobs to do with food after the experiment. So I think right there, I think this job, there's a lot of common similarities, I suppose.
So what was the turning point for you in really sort of finding a more peaceful place with food and body image?
I think for me, it was seeing friends, being around the dinner table with friends and family and hearing diet culture everywhere, hearing like my friends, the way they speak about their bodies. I think observing that as a friend, I think we always give our friends the best advice, don't we? And that's something that we often, what would you do if your friend was in your situation? And we're often better at giving that advice than giving advice to ourselves. But I think that really helped me get in a better place with food. Yeah. Okay.
So I think it's very true, isn't it, that we're often so much better at being kinder to our friends and giving advice to our friends. But yeah. So was it for you as well, like when you were hearing other people talk about body dissatisfaction or their diets, did it almost help you take a step back and be an observer and start to sort of question that and perhaps challenge that in yourself a bit, thinking, I don't want to be doing this anymore?
Yeah, I would rather be a better role model to my friends and family, I suppose, and to my clients. I'm not 100% there. I'm still challenging my own food rules that I've got. It's not an overnight work, is it? But I think I'm in a much better place than I was a few years ago. It does really take time.
And how's it helped with your move to Peru? I mean, if at all, has that had any sort of impact, positive or negative, on your relationship with food?
Oh, so the food here, it's so much different to at home. And I think that was one of the biggest challenges when I first came. Everything comes with chips and rice. And in our kind of culture at the moment, it's kind of carbohydrates are the bad, in quote marks, are the bad food. You can't eat too much of them. So having chips and rice with meals when we're eating out was a big challenge. And I had to kind of take a step back. But to be honest, I kind of, because I came here not really knowing anyone and I'm in a much better place, I feel like it's been a lot easier to overcome it than if I was at home with that kind of situation. I think it would have maybe taken a little bit longer.
So you're almost like immersed a bit in the deep end of something different in a different place, but somehow that probably enabled you to do something different in how you responded.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's good to hear. It sounds like it's probably been quite helpfully challenging, hasn't it?
Yeah, sometimes it's good to be thrown in, isn't it? But yeah.
So now, Toni, you work with women all over the world online, and you specialise in working with binge eating behaviours, supporting people to overcome binge eating behaviours. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
So when someone comes to work with you, what are some of the things that you would perhaps initially focus on if they're struggling with binge eating?
So the initial thing is probably ending restriction. We know that the restrict binge cycle kind of is something that women and men are kind of stuck in, typically because of our culture around diet. But the most common reason for binge eating I see is restriction. And that might be restriction from being on a diet, or it might be kind of our own food rules.
And do you find as well sometimes that people are sort of coming to you, maybe having followed the sort of clean eating route, or the kind of, that's been very much promoted by wellness culture of trying to eat only kind of really healthy foods, but then that's become very obsessive and rigid and quite unhealthy?
Yeah, I do see that a little bit. I haven't seen it too much since been working in private. I saw it quite a lot when I worked in the NHS, because I worked in a mental health hospital. So often I would get really severe cases of kind of orthorexia, anorexia nervosa, bulimia on there. But with binge eating, sometimes I see it, yeah.
And how would you begin to sort of support someone to stop restriction? Because obviously that's quite a hard thing to do, isn't it, when you're very ingrained in the habit of restriction and how that feels very safe?
It's very difficult. And so often I will go through, I'd encourage them to kind of write down what are their food rules at the moment. And often food rules, sometimes you think something isn't a food rule, then it turns out it is a food rule. So I really get them to challenge those food rules. So let's say one of the food rules is that they can't have bread or pasta twice in one day. That's kind of, it's just come from diet culture, I suppose, where carbs have been labelled bad and they feel like they can't eat that twice a day. So I'd get them to challenge them that food rule. So for this next week, I want you to have pasta lunch and pasta on the evening meal and kind of reflect how they feel after that. Often the reflection is that they felt exactly the same as they would if they had something else. So I think, and again, these food rules, it takes a long time. So it might be every day that week they need to do challenge that food rule to reflect on it and see what happens. And often, most of the time, nothing changes with weight, nothing changes with their health. Then they start to feel more comfortable, and being more comfortable around that food means that you have more control. So they're then less likely to binge on that food, I would say.
And I think you're just raising a great point there, that often the thought of making the change is a lot harder, isn't it? Like, I think we can all be prone to catastrophizing what terrible thing is going to happen if we step outside our comfort zone, eat the old forbidden food, be terrified of the consequences. But like you're saying, in a way, actually by doing the behavior, by taking like a baby step and actually putting that into practice, then you can kind of actually, you're getting the evidence back then, aren't you, to sort of see actually what happens, and then and it's but through that you can start to gain confidence, then I guess, to make the next step. And whereas if we just think about it all the time, we can get tied up in knots, can't we?
Yeah, exactly. It's a really crucial part, I think, to overcome that restrict binge cycle, is challenging those food rules. I think it's really important. But a lot of the time, nothing bad happens after it.
So as a binge eating dietitian as well, would you do some work around mindset or emotional eating, or more the psychological side of things, or not?
Yes, so I do look at emotional eating, and I look at I've got a week where I look at building like a toolbox of coping mechanisms. It might include breathing techniques or things that people enjoy, like drawing, or something to take their mind off how they feel rather than go straight to the food. I do touch up on that, but I know that I'm not a therapist in that matter.
Yeah, sure. But it sounds like, it's quite helpful as part of your practice to help people start to make that link maybe between their emotions and eating, and to start to sort of self-care. Yeah,
I think it's a massive thing, and a lot of women that I've worked with do struggle with coping with their emotions, and food being such a comfort in those situations. So we do work through that and look at other ways that they can cope with those feelings.
And do you find in your practice that some people with binge eating behaviours are struggling a lot with their ability to self-care and to prioritise themselves? Like, would you say, is that a theme at all in the work that you do?
Yeah, it's definitely a theme. I think it's common that when people are in these cycles of restrict and binge, maybe when restricting, they'll do a few days where they're really doing everything. They're eating minimal food because they think that's healthier. They're looking after themselves, they're going to the gym, but doing all that at once is often not sustainable. We know that, don't we? So I think it is a common theme that then when they binge, that during that kind of binge section of the cycle, they're probably not looking after themselves. They're not giving themselves any self-care. They're not doing things that they enjoy. I hear women saying no to social situations quite a lot because of the way that they feel, and they don't want to put themselves in that social situation and be around food because they don't want to have that lack of control probably in front of people. So it is a common theme.
Yeah, no, it's something I definitely resonate. So that happens quite often in my work too. And what other sort of areas would you work on, Toni, that you would say are kind of things that come up again and again, and you see as very important as part of the sort of healing process in managing binging?
Yeah, so another one I look at is another session I look at is redefining health, because in our culture, we're often told that kind of thin is healthy, being bigger or fat, whichever you prefer to be called, is not healthy. So I do a bit of work and education around that, around the body mass index, which is a measurement done with weight and height, and gives a reading of underweight, healthy, overweight, obese. Those are not words that I like to say, but the BMI wasn't designed to be used on individuals, and it was developed by a group of all white men. So it's unreliable for most people. It was also developed in the 1800s, so it's very old. But the BMI does not tell you if you're healthy or not, because if you've got a bigger BMI, that doesn't mean you're unhealthy, and you can still be a healthy BMI and not be healthy. So it really doesn't give. So I do a bit of education around BMI and weight, what that actually means, and kind of healthy versus unhealthy.
Yeah, well, I think that's so valuable, isn't it? Because I can think of so many clients that I've worked with that maybe were told as a teenager that they had an unhealthy BMI, and it sort of set them off on this dieting journey that they've never sort of managed to escape from. And actually, the reality was that they were perhaps just taller or bigger boned or had more muscle mass. And that BMI reading, that number has just been such a sort of setback and caused so much sort of distress and body dissatisfaction.
Yeah, it's definitely something I see. And my own experience, I've always been a higher BMI. I've always been in that overweight range. And it has impacted my thoughts around BMI, around my own weight and body. So I think, in my opinion as well, like the NHS are so fixated on this number, and it's something that we'd often get referrals in, this person, and it's just like BMI more than 30, and that was all that was on the referral. There was nothing else. So I think it's, in my private practice, it's something that I do not focus on, but I like to educate people about it, on why they shouldn't be so bothered. It must be really hard if you have been a bigger BMI, struggling with going to the doctor, and probably the doctor always saying it to you. It must be a really difficult situation, and it's quite traumatizing, I think, for our clients.
Yeah, no, absolutely with you. So Toni, where can people find you if they want to know more about the work that you do, if they want to get in touch with you?
So I am on Instagram as at the Binge Dietitian with full stops in between. So the binge.dietitian. I also have a website, which is thebingedietitian.com. And I am offering at the moment, I've got some times in August for a free 30-minute call, where if you would like to have a chat with me and how I can help you, no obligation kind of call.
Okay, no, that's lovely, Toni. I have mentioned that as well, actually, I'm remembering in the intro and ending. So hopefully we'll get some response to that because of it sort of peppered through the podcast. So that's great. Well, Toni, I'd just like to really thank you for coming on the podcast today and for talking about your story, and just so helpful just to hear, I think, the impact of diet culture and the dance world, and how brave you are, I think, to take a different track and to sort of, think about what was right for you. And it's wonderful to hear of the work you're doing today in changing other people's lives and supporting them, and living out in Peru, which sounds very exciting.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's been really nice to have a chat with you.
Okay, thanks, Toni. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation just as much as I did. Do go and check out all of Toni's info in the show notes. You can find Toni on Instagram as @the.binge.dietitian, and she's offering a free 30-minute call, which you can book through her Instagram bio. If you're not following me already, seek me out on Instagram at the eating disorder therapist _. And for further support with your relationship with food, do go to theeatingdisordertherapist.co.uk. If you enjoy this podcast, I'd be so grateful if you would follow, rate and review, as it helps it reach so many more listeners. Thank you so much for listening today, and I look forward to sharing another podcast episode with you very soon.